is so great to have you here today. Like, you have no idea how excited I am about this interview.
No, listen, I'm the one who's excited. You're living my like Nika influencer fantasy.
Yes.
Um, I don't know if you know this, but I wanted to be an influencer when I was in Orlando, but I couldn't cut it. And a bunch of
Why?
embarrassing things started happening.
I am so excited to have you here. I was just talking to Lupita. You know Lupita?
Oh,
Lupita
yeah, I love
reads. Oh
Lupita.
my God, I was doing a live on TikTok and she comes in and I was just like, oh, you're not gonna believe it because I discovered your book because of her.
I love her. She's such a like advocate for Latinx people. Yeah, no, I'm such a fan of hers.
She's like mama to me. Like her, Carmen, Book Papi, they are incredible. They're like my inspiration and doing what I'm doing right now. First of all,
I
let's talk about your
try.
book, Highrisk Homosexual. When you're doing memoirs, you have to be very careful how you do memoirs so they don't sound like you're doing a shopping list, right? Your memoir was literally like heartbreaking you had me on my feels, but it was so much fun. You were so much fun. Like I wanted it to be your best friend.
Thank you. That was really important for me to make the book, like at least try to make the book funny. Because I was like, young queer kids are gonna read
Mhm.
this and I don't want to depress them, you know?
Yeah.
Uh and at the same time, there's also just like a lot of like depressing gay books, and I was kind of like, can we do something else? While still acknowledging that, it is still hard to be
Yes.
gay in many ways. So I kind of wanted to balance it.
I
Hopefully.
loved it. It was perfect because I'm saying like I'm here saying like this is like literally like you exploring a world that does not approve of you, that does not like you, that is afraid of you. And it's like I feel like for queer Latinx people in particular, it's extremely hard because of the machismo that is in our bloods, that is we are
Yeah.
raised with it. So it's like you did it in such a fun way because I love these kind of stories when you are trying to tell how hard it was for you with your mom, your stepfather, your family, your uncles. I mean, tell me what the hell in the cockfighting pits in Nicaragua? Why did they ship you off there?
It's like I think that chapter was probably one of the hardest chapters for me to write, partly because I was writing about family,
Yeah.
and I still have a lot of love for my family, even though they, behaved badly in some ways. And so I was like, how do I write about them without like making them look like complete villains?
Yeah.
And so like showing some of that love, or even at least showing my complicity. Because as much as they wanted me to be straight, I wanted to be straight.
Mm.
And so it's like I kind of understand where they were coming from. In Nicaragua, it was illegal to be gay until I want to say it was
Eight.
2008.
Yes, 2008.
And so they also didn't know a lot of queer people. They grew up in the times of when the HIV crisis
AIDS.
was
The
just
AIDS.
starting.
Mhm.
And when my mom immigrated to Miami, it was that times like a
Yeah,
thousand,
the
right? Because
80s.
it was the 80s.
Yes.
And so I'm not trying to like justify anything, but it just like helped me contextualize where they were coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really important to me because if I didn't like contextualize it, if I didn't like understand where it was coming from, then in my mind it would be like they were just like behaving like crazily. And like it is better for me to like have an explanation than just like believe that I'm gonna step out into the world and everybody's just gonna act crazy and like harm me and like and at
Listen,
least like put some order into the world,
I
right?
understood that part so well because I was born and raised in Nicaragua. So I came
Mhm.
to the United States when I was 16 years old. So I went through that whole period that you're talking about. And I remember growing up, since I can remember, I knew the lesbians, las machas, and las
Mhm.
mariquitas. I knew they were upon, like, they were frowned upon. They were not liked. And I remember my friends that were gay and they were very feminine. And we're like, in fourth, third grade, like they used to get beat up. They used to be so mean to them. So it was all of that hatred. It's all that culture, machismo that you grew up with, even as a woman myself, that when I came here, I was able to kind of like free my heart and my mind of those beliefs that, the church, it's at fault as well. Especially, in Spanish countries, because everything is about the church, everything is about the Bible, and it's not seeing in the sense of like these are human beings, just like you and I. Their sexual preferences shouldn't determine who they are as a person. You know what I mean? So that chapter, that beginning was like, oh.
Yeah. Oh. Thank you. It's the machismo is like such a weird thing, especially the machismo combined with the like religiousness of it all, because without like naming names, a lot of people like very like cherry pick what from the Bible, right?
They make it their own. They make it their own. They make it their own.
But then I look at people who, again, I'm not gonna name, and I'm like, you have like 3 families. You like, like do all these bad things, and
in the
like
name of the church,
the thing that bothers you. Okay. At the same time, I'm still like kind of like brainwashed a little bit in that like I have my gold cross on. I have
but that, you see, but that's what I'm talking about. That has nothing to do. Religion, it doesn't determine who you are as a person. You are queer, you are Latinx, you're obviously a wonderful person, and you have your beliefs, and you have the right to have those beliefs if you want to. Who is to say that you're not allowed to be who you are?
Yeah, and I've had a lot of conversations with my mom recently after she read the book.
She read the book.
Oh yeah, she ended up reading the book. That was the person that I was really most afraid of reading the book, not just because of the chapters that involve her, but just because like I talk about, really intimate things. I talk about, sex and, there's this like weird fainting in the shower scene and, going to a bathhouse.
I'm getting red just thinking of your mom reading those parts.
I know. I was mortified. But eventually, basically, I was waiting to see like if the book was gonna be sold, if it was gonna be successful. Maybe I only sold 2 copies, and then like, why do I even need to tell her about this thing, right? But I did, and I gave her a copy of it when I visited her in Orlando, and she like went into her room. The other thing was that I didn't know if she would even be like, she's lived in the US for like, I want to say 30 years now.
Okay.
So she's picked up English. But it's like a very like, like basic English. And so I was like, maybe she won't even like be able to read it, right? I like read the English of it. But she went into her room and she read it in like 1 or 2 days, and she was really like supportive. And I think maybe I just didn't give her enough credit. Yeah, I think I was working from a place of trauma.
Yeah.
I had put up all these walls because of how
your experiences with your own mother. Yes, of course.
And so I was like, okay, I'm just not like, I told her I was gay and it went like not great. So now I'm just not gonna tell her anything that like is even, I'm not gonna introduce her to boyfriends. I'm not gonna tell her about anybody that I'm dating. I'm just like blocking that part because I'm really afraid that if I do bring it up, it's gonna like push her away. And we just went like decades like that, where we just did not speak about queerness, even though we lived in the same house. And
you know what I think of that? When you in your book said there's a part at the beginning of the book that I felt that a lot, because whether you're queer or not, I think every Hispanic kid can relate to the fact that you knew who you were. You hated yourself your entire life. It was something that was not spoken of because obviously your stepfather had an understanding of who you were, and your mom and the fights, and you listening to those fights and those names being called
No.
Your entire life. Can you imagine the trauma of not wanting to acknowledge what is the obvious, not wanting to accept who you are, and them not accepting you, which I think it makes everything worse when the person that you trust and love the most, it's not giving you that loving acceptance that you deserve, because you're not doing anything wrong. But like I feel like this book was like your love letter to your mom in a way.
Yeah.
Right?
Thank you. No, that really means so much to me. Like I said, I was really, really worried about how she would come across because more than anybody, I have so much love for my mom.
Yes.
She made so many sacrifices for me.
Mm.
And that was really important for me to acknowledge. And I'm writing more about that in the second book.
There's a second book?
But there's a second book that I just wrote this. Well, I'll talk about that later. Yeah, I think kids learn from the adults around them, and the adults around me either were really homophobic or they didn't talk about queerness.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, I guess that's what I have to do. And it wasn't just my mom. I remember there's so many things that I left out. Like I remember one time I was in Nica and I was out to dinner with an uncle and a cousin, and there was a gay couple sitting at a table next to ours. And I think my cousin like briefly like looked that way. And my cousin was like, and my uncle was like, don't look over there. Gay people, that's what they do. They stare or something like that. And I was like, what does that mean? And I remember also like every time we would drive by like trans sex workers, which there are a lot of in Managua.
A lot.
They would like make jokes and just a combination of all those things. I was like, oh, this is like a forbidden thing. Like I cannot talk about being queer at all. But I think as like similarly, like I had a journey from going from like deep shame to pride. I think my mom also had a journey where she went from like deep like prejudice to understanding. Just as like the culture has shifted a little bit. There's like more, queer visibility. It's like not as taboo to speak about. Even in like Latinx media. I mean, I think of like Caso Cerrado and how like Dr. Ana Maria Polo is bi, right? And she's openly bi. And then like all of the queer episodes, I would say like 90% of them, it's like the queer people win. And she like gives like a big monologue about how it's like not okay to have hate in your heart and all this. And I just think of like not only my mom, but like abuelitas and tias and like all the people that watch
are seeing this positive
and are like, okay, I guess there is something to this, right? And it's like becoming very normalized.
Oh, I wish Walter Mercado was here to be like, ladies, it's fine, and then everything is going to be okay.
But even with Walter, I know growing up, even though he like hadn't come out of the closet, I mean, I don't even know what his like sexual orientation was because he will never
speak about it.
That. I think he was already doing a lot, bringing mysticism into like Catholic households. So I think that might have been like a step too far. And then just looking the way he did. And then in his documentary, this is what I was gonna say, like even he who was like such a queer icon to me never felt comfortable like being out. And in his documentary, he was like, oh, my sexuality is like I make love with the wind, and would like say like vague things like that, where it's like
he's
giving
like,
us the roundabout.
Like Juan Gabriel when they asked him if he was gay, and he's like, you don't ask the obvious, honey. I was like, stop right now. Viral, make this video viral, please. Like, let's don't talk about things that are obvious. Like, why do we even bother?
Yeah, it's like it's redundant. But yeah, Walter y Juanga were my two big like. It is possible, and then at the same time, it is possible, but you have to be quiet about it, right?
Yeah, it is. It is a shame, though. It is a shame that now things have shifted tremendously. There's still a long way to go, but I think, you know what? I think your book should be translated to Spanish.
I'm like desperate for this to happen. I'm like, I don't
Who
know
do I
what I
need
need
to
to
call? Who do
do.
I need to email? Like, this book needs to be in the hands of every Latin American boy and girl like that is still living what you lived. Because, obviously Latin Americans still very machista, very ignorant in their
Yeah.
ways, in their culture. So I feel like kids need this story, especially
You know,
teenagers.
I was in Nika. What was I in Nika? Like around September, October of last year. And usually when I go, I stay with my family. But this time I was like, when I stay with my family, it's like you kind of have to do stuff that your family wants to do.
Yeah.
So this time I was like, I'm just gonna go. It was me and my boyfriend,
Mm,
and I'm gonna like I don't know, like experience Nika for myself on my like own terms, right?
yes.
And we started off in Granada, and it just by like some magical coincidence, um, there was a festival. It was El Carnaval de Granada, right?
Yeah.
And it was, I was like, I wonder like what, like how like queerness, like how like queer me and my boyfriend can be. I think because I also had a lot of trauma in Nika,
Yeah.
um, where I was like, I don't,
Managua.
in Managua, yeah. But this time we are in Granada, and I was like, I don't really know how to like navigate queerness right now. And like I said, it was the Carnaval, and it was really, really queer, and not just queer, but really trans. And I
Mm.
was like blown away by it, and I was like, where was this like when I was here? There was like the groups of like dancers, and one of the groups was like all trans women. And like everybody was like, yeah, like hyping them up, and it was just so joyful and celebratory
Mm.
and like normal, and nobody was like looking at them weird. And I was
Mm.
like what, like I had like I needed this, right?
You
Um,
needed this when you were 13 and they ship you off to Nicaragua.
yeah, yeah. But I mean, I've reached a place where like I'm fine. I'm just glad that it is like there for other people now.
Yes.
Yeah.
When I read it, I was like, wow, how times, first of all, have changed and how
Mhm.
now our kids have these stories that they can pick up and read and relate to and find some way of healing. Like I don't think you entirely heal from your trauma and everything that you went through, but I think like these stories just fit the soul in a positive way because it makes them feel like they're not alone, and they're not, because sometimes that's how you felt, alone, that you didn't have anybody. Oh, makes me want to read
Thank
the
you
book
for
again. And the audiobook, I did both. I did the ebook and the audiobook, and it's narrated by you, and it's perfect.
Okay, I'm so glad that you like the audiobook because I went in, I was like, I didn't really listen to a lot of audiobooks before, and I was like, is anybody even gonna buy this audiobook? I
Oh, it
still
was
tried really
perfect.
hard with the recording,
I loved
but I was
it.
like, who
It gives
knows?
it gives because you know your story, right? Like I feel like with audiobook narrators, you have to be very careful, especially because I can shut down a book just on the audiobook. And then like if I'm really interested in the book, like I was like, okay, I'm gonna give it a second. Let me switch the format. But your audiobook was incredible because it felt real. It was like you telling your story. Like I'm sitting with you somewhere thinking in my head and you're telling me your life story. And it was like
Oh,
heartbreaking. It was moving. It was inspiring, but it was so much fun. It was really like,
mhm.
I was like, I need a friend like him. Like, where was I?
We're friends. Let's be friends.
Let's be friends. He's not like so much fun.
I thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, audiobook narrators, it is like a really important like
Yeah.
thing. I remember once I had a story published, and the website decided to like release like an audio recording of the story. And for some reason they didn't like reach out to me and be like, hey, are you
So you're
interested in recording it since it is like a personal essay? And the person that they hired to record it, it was really weird. It was, I mean, you like you can't tell everything but from somebody's voice, but I was like, this is like a straight white person. And there were
I
in the story that was like that were like, I was tired of being like a poor queer Latinx person and being like stereotypical or something like that. Hope it was a little bit more artful than that. But then hearing like a straight white guy say that, I was like, this is weird. Like, why didn't y'all ask me?
Oh my God. I will literally don't even give a second chance to books like that. I'm
I
that
went in
petty.
and I
I'm petty.
deleted the story.
Oh, you did? I'm petty. One thing that I cannot stand of audiobook narrators is when the story is obviously Latinx and there's certain words, there's Spanish words in there, and it's a gringo saying these words, and I'm just like right now, I am listening to La Familia, the Family Izquierdo,
Mhm.
and it's like multiple points of view, and it's multiple audiobook narrators, and they're all bilingual. They're all Mexican. I don't know where they're from, but the story is, for Mexicans, and chef kiss. Like it just makes a huge difference when you're.
It does because it really takes you out of it.
Yes, it does. I'm petty, so
Yeah.
I'll drop the book right away. I'll be like, no, we're good.
And it's also like, I mean, this is a little more like debatable, but like sometimes you want somebody from that specific country
Yeah.
to read it, right? Like not all Spanish is going to be the same. And
Yeah.
that's also something that I was thinking about when I was writing the first chapter, which is set in Nicaragua. And I had like a lot of fun doing it as well, even though like it doesn't seem like it would be. But I was like, I get to like put like specific Nicaraguan words. Like
Nicaraguan slang, yeah.
yeah, like I grew up with like gay was cochon, right?
Ochon.
And that's not something that I hear from any other countries.
I think we're
Um,
the I think Salvadorians also say,
okay.
yeah, I think so.
But just putting little things like that, it was just like, I don't know. It was like when I
It
say like
makes it more
like it would be fun,
personal.
it's because it's like still a homophobic word. Uh, but I was like, homophobic word representation, I
I was
guess.
like, wait a second. Once they had that, once Lupita is like, yeah, the cockfighting rings in Nicaragua. I was like, what? I was like, wait, hold on a second. Who is writing these stories? Because you have like the typical Nicaraguan authors, Sergio Ramirez, Yoconda Belli, like the classics, the oldies. And it's like, who is this person? Who is this guy? I need to know. So I went and bought the book like right away. I'm
Thank
easy
you.
influence. You're welcome. We loved it. I want more. Talk to me about the second one. What is happening?
Okay, so when I was writing Highrisk Homosexual, the first book, um, one of the things that I discovered as I was writing it that was really important in my journey was money and
Mm,
class and being poor and how that impacted my queerness. But because the book is about shame to pride, I
mm.
felt like this pressure to like mostly focus
On your
on
journey.
queerness.
Mm-hmm.
But class and money hovered in the background. And so now for this second book, I really want to write about money. Money is like one of my favorite things to read about. Like I always love in a story when people tell me what everything cost, and also what everybody is wearing. Those are like my two big things. And so I was like, okay, I want to write a book about growing up poor in Florida, the ways that money shapes our lives, and ultimately finding healing through community and alternatives to like capitalism.
Mm.
And the concept of the book is that when I was a kid, I grew up believing in all of those like supposedly feel good sayings that are like, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Yeah.
And also that like if you're hardworking and humble and obedient, America will reward you in the end.
Yeah.
But as I started growing up, I realized that that didn't apply to me or to the people around me, especially not my mom, who worked her entire life, And her quote unquote reward was that ultimately she became disabled and was able to retire because she applied for disability. And I'm like, is that like the best that we have to like look forward to, right? Um, and so this book is going to be a collection of essays, pushes back against that harmful myth that suffering breeds like strength and resilience. And instead, I'm trying to like capture all of the moments in my life when I felt really weak, but still found like the power to like push back and dream big.
Oh, I need it. Where do I sign up for the arc?
Well, I'm trying to sell it. I wrote.
Oh my God.
So we're going out on we're selling it like based on like a sample.
Okay.
So I wrote 4 chapters, and literally today my agent is gonna send it out and try to sell it on the sample, which is like sometimes with nonfiction you could sell it, you just have the whole book written, or
Yeah.
sometimes you just have a sample and they'll pay you to finish writing it.
Penguin Random House. I love you. Penguin Libros. I need this book translated to
I
Spanish.
know.
Let me reach out to my girl. Maylin, Penguin Libros, por favor. Necesitamos este libro en español.
Yeah, I don't know who I need to bag, what I need to do, but I'll do it.
I'll do it too.
Yeah.
I'll get Lupita on the train too. I'm sure she loved this so much. Oh, I think her passion for that book was like, okay, instant buy. She loved it. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna love it too. I wanted to ask you about something from the book, from Highrisk Homosexual, which was that was a debut, not memoir for you?
Yep, my first book.
Have you reading anything before this? Did you have practice? Because you did great.
Well, I'll say it took me a really long time to write it. It took me like 7 years. But that's because I also like it started off being just a collection of essays, and then I turned it into more of a memoir with like a narrative arc, and I made it more chronological. But also, I didn't really know what I was doing when I started. Like, I didn't know how to quote unquote tell a story, meaning like I didn't know about, conflict or tension or motivations. I was just like randomly writing. And it took me that long to like figure out what I wanted the book to be. And hopefully this next one doesn't take me 7 years to write. Yeah.
Those 7 years were needed.
I did, because in those 7 years, I would say when I started writing it, I still had a lot of that shame. And by the time those 7 years passed, I was a different person. And I was able to write more about pride and more, celebratory stories. But I remember I started writing it in undergrad when I took this creative nonfiction class, and there was this bathhouse in Orlando. There's the bathhouse chapter in the book that I really, really wanted to go to. I think I was like 22 or 23 at the time, but I still had a lot of that shame where I was like, oh, if you go to this bathhouse, what does that mean about you? I still believed all of those things that were like, oh, if you're sexual, that means you're a bad person. All of that stigma that comes from HIV and AIDS. And so, yeah, I was really, really like nervous about going there. But in this creative nonfiction class, my professor was like, all right, everybody, we're setting the workshop schedule. Edgar, in 2 weeks, turn in a story. And I was like, oh, okay. And I was like, okay, I really want to go to this bathhouse. Maybe I can like pretend like I'm a journalist and like treat it like I'm like doing like a little
research.
And that's like a way that I can go, but sort of like navigate my shame and not feel too like bad about it, right? And so I ended up doing that and turning in that bathhouse chapter. And I was still really scared because I was like, it was mostly straight people in the workshop. And I was like, oh my God, what are they going to think? Like, oh, Edgar's going off to these bathhouses, blah, blah, blah. But they were actually really, really supportive.
Were they? Okay.
Yeah. And they're like, this is amazing, you should keep going. And I think after that, I was like, okay, I will keep going with this. And yeah, I from like, that's where I think the book really started.
Well, I think you needed those 7 years because you had time to navigate yourself through,
Mm-hmm.
growing and embracing who you were, but also experiencing a lot of the things that this world has. First of all, so you start at 13, right? And you go through the whole going to Nicaragua, your mother leaving you there with your uncle so they can sort of man you up, force girls into you, which I can only imagine how traumatic that moment was. But you also are talking about, obviously, the title of your book is Highrisk Homosexual. That's because a doctor prescribed you Highrisk Homosexual, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it was. So that was when I was in graduate school. I signed up to, well, I went to the campus doctor to try to get on PrEP,
Yeah.
specifically Truvada, which if for people who don't might not know what that is, it's a 1 a day pill that reduces your risk of contracting HIV by basically 100%.
Mm.
And so I was actually doing something very like unrisky. I was right. I was like going to get a medicine to like, protect
Avoid.
myself.
Yes.
Um, and when I went, like the doctor, and this is just a thing that happens basically when you're queer and you go to the doctor, they ask you like a bunch of questions about your sex life,
Mm.
how many partners you've had. And I started getting nervous because I was like, oh, what if at that time I wasn't having a lot of sex? And I was like, what if they think, oh, you don't need to be on this drug, so we're not
Yeah.
going to prescribe it to you. And so I was like, oh yeah, I sleep with like 3 guys a month, yada yada, which I still don't even think is like that wild. Um, oh, and they had also asked me like, do you meet any of these men online? As
I
if that was like a
remember.
weird thing. And I was like, no, I meet them in person. So it was like, yeah, I was like basically like 3 guys a month. And they were like, oh, okay. And they gave me my prescription. And on my prescription, it says, prescribed to Edgar Gomez, 25 years old, high-risk homosexual. And I
Yeah.
saw that and I was like, at first I was like really annoyed because at this point it was like 2019 or 18. I was like, are we not like beyond this like terminology?
Yeah.
Um, what is like risky about what I'm doing? Uh, if they prescribe like also queer people aren't the only people that contract HIV.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, straight people also take PrEP, and I really doubt that there's a prescription that says, high risk
Heterosexual.
heterosexual. All of this is doing is like further stigmatizing queer people.
That made me so mad, that part when you put it in your book. I was like, what?
It's wild. Um, but eventually I was like, you know what? Like most things, I was like, whatever. I guess this is kind of funny.
Well, you made it funny for the book.
And so I titled the book that because I was like, I'm gonna reclaim this. And I'm gonna like, okay, I am gonna be a high risk
I'm gonna make
homosexual.
this my entire personality from now on.
Yeah. If this
I'm gonna be
is who you want me to
fierce.
be.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Stereotyping at its best. I love it.
But at the same
Love
time,
it.
like when I first saw that prescription, I was like, I'm not a high risk heterosexual. I mean, homosexual.
Homosexual.
But then as I like looked at my book, as like after I'd finished, I was like looking at each chapter and I was like, oh, actually, there is like a lot of risk here. Though the risk comes from like the culture at large and
Yeah.
homophobia and
Mm.
machismo. It's like external, whereas high risk homosexual on a prescription implies that it's like you're doing something wrong, right?
Yeah. That's how it feels. That's how it felt for me. I was like, how
Yeah.
rude. But this is just a problem within the system that,
Yeah.
in this country, and I think everywhere in the world, is just that lack of understanding and knowledge. And we're still stuck. Like, I feel like we're so behind, but we're making little changes, little by little.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't till like very recently, as in like 2 months ago, that gay men were allowed to like donate blood. Active or sexually active gay men are allowed to donate blood because it was assumed that all gay people have HIV/AIDS and are gonna quote unquote contaminate the national blood supply.
Nice.
Oh, which again implies that only queer people have HIV,
And it's
which is
not true.
harmful to straight people
Yeah.
because then straight people go out and have sex and think, oh, I'm never going to be able to get it
And
because
then
I'm
they
not
get
gay.
it.
That's a gay thing. And then they get it, right?
Yep.
So,
I can't anymore with that. But yeah, that was one thing in the book that was just like, oh. But it also brought me back to tears because you put in your experience with Paul's nightclub.
mhm.
Because I think honestly, I made a video about this before. And somebody, first of all, thank you for doing the Latinx word explanation at the beginning of the book. I thought that was like really cool because I know there's a lot of, issues with the word itself, and it's a word that I use. But when people ask me like, oh, why did you use it? And I was like, the year was 2016. And the biggest massacre in the United States happened in Orlando, Florida, in the nightclub Pulse. And so when you brought that up, your experience as a queer man, when that happened in your city, was like so emotional for me. And I've been using Latinx words since 2016 because of that particular moment in time. So that was like, I think you needed those 7 years to kind of like grasp your queer experience, your, male queer experience, to bring it into life and make it so beautiful and heartbreaking and emotional and inspiring at the same time.
Thank you. Yeah, that was probably the second hardest chapter to write. And still on Latinx, like that, yeah, it was really important for me to like just like put that right up front because trans people have been a part of the community for, ever. And it's really important for me to like use language that includes them, especially since trans people are the people who have like been at the forefront of queer liberation movements. And so just naturally makes sense. A lot of like the arguments against using the words Latinx or Latin just don't really make sense to me. They're like, oh, you're changing the language. I'm like, I don't really feel loyal to the Spanish language. It's just it's another colonizer language.
It's not
like,
your language. If we were going to talk about our language, I will be speaking Nicaragua, and I'm not.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Or mosquito. So it's like, you guys stop.
Exactly.
Like, stop.
And then also language is constantly evolving. Like, so
they're becoming, which is a beautiful
sense.
thing. It's becoming
Right. And I would want it to, or
yes, to make the change.
We all be speaking like Shakespeare or something, right? Like,
oh God.
The other argument is like people like cite polls saying like, oh, the majority of Latinx people, or they'll say Latin people don't like that word. But frankly, the majority of Latin people are homophobic. And so it makes sense to me that they wouldn't want to be more inclusive. Like, that's
of course
just
not.
Like,
that's not something they're afraid of. They're not welcoming because they're afraid of what they don't know and they don't understand. And their ignorance doesn't allow them to move forward. That's the problem.
Yeah, they're like, you want me to do something for trans people? Like, I don't, like, they don't even believe in trans people. So like, why would they do that, right? But yeah, it was important for me to just like start off right away. And the other thing is that Latinidad in general is like a thing that I'm like trying to unpack and deconstruct and sort of almost like move away from. But I still felt like I needed to use the word Latin or Latinx at certain points in the book. And so it's like, oh, how do I acknowledge that Latinidad has this like racist and anti-indigenous history, while at the same time, like I still like needed that word every now and then. So it was just like a complicated like balancing act.
It's funny because I read your book first, right? But then I read Tenoch Huerta, Orgullo Prieto. Have you read it?
No, but I was listening to an excerpt yesterday, actually. Yeah.
Do the audiobook. He narrates it himself. And it's incredible because he is talking about how this generation now, right now, in this moment in time, it is changing the language. And it's changing the language to be more inclusive. And obviously the book talks about, racism and classism in Mexico, which is literally like something that Latin Americans don't speak of, and they just,
Mhm.
sweep under the rug. But it's something
Yeah.
that is very present, homophobia, classism, racism. You grew up.
Yeah.
It's something that is being in our blood for generations. And I think this generation is just like, we're not doing that.
Yeah, I'm really inspired by
Yeah.
this generation, especially I think because of the internet. People
Oh
just
my
have like
God.
more resources, right? Um, and the excerpt that I listened to from Orgullo Prieto was about how when he was younger, he had this teacher who basically said some like racist shit to him.
Mm.
But it was a teacher with the same complexion as him. And
Yeah.
so he was talking about how like sometimes it like comes from your own people as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I
It
found
will
super.
come the first time. It will come from your people, from your own people. So, but
Right.
it's just something that you just need to kind of like detach yourself from, because you are raised like that. So sometimes you do it like unconsciously. Like sometimes you just do it thinking like, oh shit, like you snap out of it. You're like, okay, hold on. No, it's
Yeah.
when I came here, I had to like deconstruct my entire mindset. I felt,
Yeah.
because I always felt it wrong, but I always felt that growing up in a Hispanic household with my grandmother and my aunt, which were extremely religious, I felt like I didn't have a voice to tell them. I rebelled in a different way, but that was not enough because it didn't allow me myself to stop and think, what you're thinking, it's racist. What you're thinking, it's homophobic, and it shouldn't be that way. And it took me like moving here to
Yeah.
realize that when I was outside that bubble, and I was just like,
Yeah.
I was in Miami Beach every night when I was 16, 17 years old, at the
Wow.
nightclubs with the gays. It's like always those books with those real stories that you can relate to. It's like those experiences that you're like, okay, so I'm not, from the community, but the influence I had when I first moved here, and I was mesmerized because you grew up so, oh, women can do this, women can do that, and it's like, oh my God, I can do shit. Like, am I supposed just to am I meant to just get married and have kids? Like, is that what I'm
Right.
supposed to, like, is that all you guys seeing me? Like, and so
Yeah.
coming here and seeing everything and everyone being like, just so open and free and happy. I was like, I want that for me. Like, I want
Yeah.
to be able to be like, I love myself. I love who I am. I don't care what anybody else thinks. I'm still going to do me. So.
Yeah. And when you came, were you on your own or were you with family?
So it was the first time I was meeting my parents, my mom and my dad. They left
Oh,
in the revolution, during the revolution in
wow. Okay.
Nicaragua. So when
Wow.
I met them, I mean, they left me when I was a toddler, so I don't really remember them. I mean, my mom was very present, phone calls,
Mhm.
as much as possible, as much as she could. But yeah, it's like the stories that you were just talking about, your essays coming out. It's my parents had multiple part-time jobs to be able to survive. They worked
Mhm.
so hard. They are incredible people, but they still struggle. And it's like what you say, like everybody's like, oh, if you work hard, you're going to achieve your dream. And it's like, not for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not for people like us. In
Well,
the
that's the
sense of
reason.
like, like your parents came here, they don't speak the language. It was their sacrifice. Like
Yeah.
I feel like I'm living my dream. Like I am doing what I love to do, which is obviously books and, talking about books and authors and their lives and how much their
Mhm.
books changed my life, because I've been a big reader since I was a little girl. It's the only thing I had to kind of keep me sane.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, same, especially when you're like broke and like don't have like access to like a bunch of
Mm,
experiences or to travel or
yep.
things like that. I know that reading for me was just something that like expanded my like world of possibility and of
Yep.
what was out there.
It allows you to
Um,
dream.
it allowed me to dream. Yeah, it taught me like what to dream about. Like I wouldn't have even known what to dream about, right?
Yeah.
Um, and it was also like a constant like between moving when you're moving around a lot, you can like carry a book and like even though everything around you is changing, the story that you're reading is the same, and that like gives you like a
Yeah.
foundation, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's always looking for those stories that will change your perspective in life, add something to your ways, you know, and experience, like in this case, your book, experience what you had to go through your entire life. And it teaches compassion. You know what I mean? And I feel like these stories are needed for that reason.
Yeah. And I mean, even writing the book helped me, I think, be a more compassionate person.
But it helped you
Because
heal, didn't it?
and it helped me heal.
Yeah.
Because like when I started, I was like, I know that I love my mom and my family, even though, like I said, they did behave badly. So I guess I have to answer for myself, like, why do you still love them? Like, why do you feel like they're not like complete villains?
They did the
And
best they could given their circumstances
exactly, I
that
had
they
to like
grew up
ask,
in.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, like what were their motivations? Why did they think being gay? Why were they so afraid of it?
Yeah.
And through answering those questions, I got to understand them a little bit more. And that was really healing for me.
Yeah, I know. Trust me, I know. You always wonder, like, why is it that the people that you love the most are capable of thinking and being so backwards, like in their ways, like so behind in their way they see life and they see people. And you know, it's like their ignorance is not allowing them to move forward. And thank God things have changed. Thank God we have the internet. Thank God people are being more vocal about it. And you have books and you have the TV and you have all the representation that matters and honestly makes a difference for everyone in any marginalized community. I feel like hopefully we will continue to do that.
Yeah, I'm super inspired. Like I said, like growing up, it was Walter, it was Juanga, and they weren't even allowed to be gay.
Ricky
So
Martin, don't go that far. Ricky Martin.
okay, but he came out more recently, right?
Yeah.
And
But
Ricky,
the
I love
thing
him.
to me was that big Mexican, oh my God, the big Mexican guy that pretty much launched every single famous Mexican person. What was his name? Oh my God. Back in the day, there was this guy. I can't remember his name right now. But that guy knew that Ricky Martin was gay from when he was a teenager. And he told, when he was in Menudo, right? And he told Ricky Martin, I'm going to give you an advice. Don't come out as gay because you're going to ruin your whole career. And I think at that time, that was probably the early 90s, I think at that time that was right.
Yeah.
That like the world was not ready for him. The biggest star, the biggest, that everybody was in love with this man to come out as a, you know, gay person.
Yeah, not only did he not come out, but he was like such a straight icon. Like all the women were like, "Oh my God, Ricky!" Right? And so, yeah. But now we have like Lil Nas X, who started off like he hadn't come out when Old Town Road came out.
Yeah.
And like the advice that might be given to him was like, "Don't come out. You have this like huge hit.
Yeah.
If you come out, it's gonna ruin your career."
Within that community,
and in hip hop, right? And he was like, "No, I'm coming out," and it like made him even more successful. I think just people seeing like him being like authentic and himself, like drew more people in.
I think so. I think that's what actually made him like one of the biggest stars that there is right now. It's because he had the courage to say no.
Yeah.
Who likes me, who doesn't like me, doesn't like me. And that's it. That speaks a lot
and I'm
about
seeing
somebody.
So many artists doing that.
I hope so. I think, you know what it is? You know what it is like to have to grow up denying who you are, denying yourself of your feelings. That has to be like the biggest trauma ever. Not to be able to speak your mind, to be who you are. And I can't even imagine. I can't.
Yeah, it makes you paranoid and it makes you like
anxiety.
Angry.
I feel like, yes, like you're probably big time diagnosed with like mood disorder, anxiety, paranoia. Like I feel like you will have all these issues.
Yeah, because you're like, who's watching me? What do they know? Are they treating me this way because of this way? What if I told them? How would they treat me?
You are constantly self-doubting. You're constantly self-doubting yourself, which you go through the book in your early age. Like you go through that self-doubting yourself and questioning everything and the meaning of how why people were doing the things they were doing to you. Like if there was something behind, and it was like, oh, Horrible.
But you know what? I think something that I didn't write as much into it, but I was like, I think the Nicas who read this will know is that a lot of the men in my life also experienced a lot of trauma. Especially my uncles who like were recruited by the Sandinistas early on. And like sent off to like Cuba to like learn how to dismantle bombs when they were
Yeah.
like 13, 14 years old, right? And so like when shit like that happens to you at such a young age,
Yeah.
like obviously that's going to impact how you treat the next generation.
Of course.
I mean, I remember my mom actually recently, she was talking to me about how when she was a little girl, she would like walk down the streets and there'd just be like dead bodies everywhere.
My mom
And
told me the same.
she'd be with my abuela, and they would be like looking at the faces of the bodies to make
Yeah.
sure it wasn't one of her brothers.
Yeah.
And so like to them, it's also like
It's
very
that
relative.
generational trauma too, that it's carry
Mhm.
on from generation to generation. And on top of that, you're adding social, economically problems and communism and revolutions and really not war, really nasty thing. Because my mom just told me the same not so long ago, because she really doesn't talk about those times, the reasons why she had to like run away from the country. Like I have like one very vague memory when I was a little girl, waking up, I think it must have been like 3, 4 in the morning, and my grandmother is holding my hand, and we're doing this humongous line of people. It was like line at 3, 4 in the morning for us to get a ration of rice with a half a soap and something like little rations of food to feed an entire family. Like it was great. I have like very vague memory of that, and I asked my mom, and she's like, "Yeah, that you went through that. That's exactly what happened. That's the reason why I had to leave." I was like, because there was no food, there was no nothing, there was no money. The country was trying to get back from war, from this revolution, and yeah, she's like, I remember skipping bodies when I had to go from one place to the next, skipping dead bodies on the floor. Trying to get, somebody was in the hospital and she had to go from the house, and we didn't live far from the hospital, and she had to like skip dead bodies. So it's like all of that. Ugh.
Trauma, generational trauma.
Oh my God, we have so much to deal with. And the thing is that we don't talk about it. So it's like they don't talk about it. Everything is unspoken. Everything is not allowed. Everything is a taboo. And it's like, how are you going to deal with those emotions? How are you going to grow and do better for yourself and others if you're not talking about these issues?
I mean, talk about like trans, like national, like things we have in common, but like Colombia and Encanto, right? The
Yeah.
whole thing is we don't talk about it, right? We don't talk
Yeah.
about Bruno
We don't talk about
and
Bruno.
breaking those
Yeah.
generational traumas.
Yeah.
Um,
But it's always like
I think I
that.
need to show my mom that. And I
You
need to show her
do.
everything everywhere all
I
at
love
once.
that movie. I love that movie. That movie was like so like on point on a lot of things. I was like, huh, that's us.
Yeah. But also, I was like, never in my life. I mean, I love my grandma, but I'm like, I don't know that she would. I'm like, apologize at the end, but maybe
we
this
can
new
we can
generation.
all dream. This is Disney. Let it be. Let
I
Disney
think
have
we
this
have to be
one.
that grandma for the next generation.
You know what I think of that? I think that's good that it was done. And even though it's not real life for a lot of people, but I think like if people can look at this, parents nowadays can look at these movies and be like, you know what, it's okay to apologize to my kids,
Right.
because it makes a huge difference when you do something wrong to your kids and you come up and you're like, I'm sorry, I should have not done or said that.
Yeah.
Forgive me. And I bet you that right there will be anything, it will be bigger than what actually happened. It will not erase what happened, but it will allow you to understand that your parents are human beings and that they do make mistakes, and it's okay to make mistakes as long as you take, deal with the consequences. Accountability. I think that's what's important right now, accountability.
Yeah.